The grand rotunda smelled like old stone and recycled air, and the quiet confidence of species who had never once been told no. 312 delegations sat in their assigned tiers, arranged by seniority of membership, which really meant arranged by how long ago each species had learned to behave. The Valori sat at the top. They had been sitting at the top for 11,000 years, and their spines had curved to fit the chairs, and the chairs had been carved to fit the curve, and no one remembered which came first. Thuric Volsci pressed his claw against the ratification glyph and felt nothing. The document on his screen was 14 pages long. It used the word containment 11 times. It used the word sanitation 8 times. It used the word kill 0 times. The language was so clean you could eat off it. He had built his career on the specific art of making ugly things sound like plumbing repairs. The glyph pulsed green beneath his claw. Somewhere, a ship began charging its weapons. Thurek closed the document, archived it under Routine Enforcement Actions, subsection 9, and ordered lunch. He chose the grain bowl. He always chose the grain bowl on days when the schedule ran long. 3 jump points away, Kale Vasic was hauling seedlings. His cargo bay held 400 crates of agricultural starter kits, soil pods, nutrient packets, gene-tagged wheat and barley, and something the colonists on Meridian 4 had crossbred with a local root vegetable that tasted like absolute garbage but grew in anything. Kale had tried it once. His daughter had laughed at the face he made, and then eaten 3 servings because she was 11, and 11-year-olds will eat anything if you tell them it's gross enough. The comm suite lit up at 14:07 station time. Not a message, a wall of emergency bands. Every frequency, overlapping. Kale's fingers moved across the controls with the automatic ease of a man who had been flying freight for 20 years. He isolated the bands, filtered, sorted. Meridian IV, all channels. Emergency broadcast. He called his daughter. No answer. He called the colony's central comm relay. Dead. He called the neighbor, the school, the freight depot where his ex-wife's sister worked the cargo docks. Dead, dead, dead. Kale sat in the pilot's chair for a while. The emergency bands played on his speakers. Voices. Static. Something that might have been an explosion or might have been a building falling. He turned the volume down, but didn't turn it off. He went to the cargo bay. 400 crates of seedlings. He opened one, checked the soil moisture, adjusted the nutrient drip. Opened another, checked, adjusted. He did this for 6 hours. His hands were steady the entire time. A man who has been threading asteroid belts with overloaded cargo for 2 decades does not let his hands shake. His hands were not the part of him that was breaking. 9 minutes. That was how long the Valori battlecruiser held position over Meridian 4's capital. 9 minutes of orbital lance fire. The weapon was designed for hardened military targets, bunkers, shield generators, warships. Using it on a colony was like using a surgical laser to burn ants. The targeting officer later noted in her log that the most difficult part of the operation was calibrating the lance to hit structures as small as residential buildings. She had to manually override the weapon's minimum target protocols 3 times. The colony's capital had a population of 16,042. It had a school with a mural of the local star system painted by students. It had a freight depot that smelled like engine coolant and the local root vegetable. It had a central plaza where, on this particular day, the annual Harvest Festival was running, which meant there were speakers mounted on poles, playing music, and there were children eating food from stalls, and there were colored lights strung between buildings that had taken volunteers 2 weeks to hang. The lance fired for 9 minutes. The speakers survived longer than the buildings. They were mounted on metal poles, and metal takes longer to melt than wood and glass and people. So for a while, after the buildings were gone, and the stalls were gone, and the colored lights were gone, the music kept playing. The council released its statement 6 hours later. The word regrettable appeared 4 times. The word necessary appeared 7. The word human appeared once in the phrase human expansion patterns, which made 16,000 dead people sound like a weather system that had been politely redirected. The Valori ambassador, a tall creature with scales the color of old money, had drafted the press release before the fires on Meridian 4 were out. He had been drinking fermented nectar at the time. His aide would later confirm this detail under oath, though that was months away, and on this day, the aide simply refilled the glass and said nothing. 46 species had been sanitized in the Council's history. Every single one had followed the same pattern: grief, outrage, a furious speech at the podium, then negotiation, then submission. The pattern was so reliable, it had its own internal designation: Behavioral Correction Cycle Standard Model. The average time from strike to capitulation was 41 days. The human ambassador to the Concord was a woman named Liat Barbosa. She was 53 years old. She had been a trade negotiator before this post, and before that a school administrator, and before that a mother of 2 boys who were now grown and living on Earth, and had not been anywhere near Meridian 4, which meant she could think clearly, which was perhaps the most dangerous thing about her. She stood at the podium. The rotunda was silent. 312 delegations watched. Barbosa removed her translation earpiece, set it on the podium with a small click that the chamber's acoustics carried to every tier. She walked out. No tears, no fist on the lectern, no promise of revenge. 3 delegations filed formal inquiries within the hour, not about the strike, about the silence. 46 species had raged at that podium. Rage was in the model, silence was not. Kale's comm chirped at 0300, not his daughter, a neighbor's emergency beacon, auto-cycling a loop distress message. The voice was calm the way emergency recordings are calm, pre-recorded, measured, designed to keep panic at a distance. Underneath the voice, bleeding through from an open channel somewhere in the wreckage, Kale could hear the Harvest Festival music, still playing. He sat in the cargo bay, among the seedlings, and listened to the music and the calm recorded voice telling him that emergency services had been contacted, that help was on the way, that everyone should remain in their designated shelter areas. There were no shelters. There were no emergency services. There was no help on the way. There was only the music and the voice and 400 crates of seedlings for a planting season that would never come. The transmission came 12 hours later. Open frequency. No encryption. No diplomatic channel. No preamble, no formal structure. No legal citation. Sent in the clear from Earth's Unified Naval Strategic Command on every band the galaxy could hear. 2 words. Received, understood, stand by. 12 Council species formally requested a translation review, convinced something had been lost or garbled in the conversion between human language and galactic standard. The translation office ran the message through every linguistic filter they had and returned it unchanged. Nothing had been lost. The Valori ambassador read the message, finished his nectar, and made a joke about human dramatic flair. His aide laughed, because that was the aide's job. Across the chamber, Thurik Volshai read the message on his personal screen, and for a reason he could not name, did not delete it. He saved it to a file he had never used before. He labeled the file, Miscalculations. He did not know yet how right the label was. But something in the 2-word message, its smallness, its patience, the way it ended not with a threat, but with an instruction to wait, made the scales on the back of his neck rise. He ordered dinner. He did not choose the grain bowl. He was not hungry. Earth went quiet. Not the quiet of grief. Not the quiet of defeat. The galaxy had heard both of those before and knew their shape. The sputtering comms, the desperate pleas for aid, the slow fade of a species learning to kneel. This was different. This was the quiet of a door closing. Every human ship in Concord space turned around and went home. Every human trade route shut down. Every human comm relay went dark. One day the channels were full of freight chatter and cargo manifests and a species that talked too much and traded too hard and smiled at strangers in docking bays. The next day, nothing. Silence like a held breath. The galactic economy noticed on day 3. Humans ran 31% of independent freight logistics. Not the important cargo. The Valori and the elder species controlled military and diplomatic supply chains. Humans ran the ordinary things: grain, machine parts, medical supplies for outer ring colonies that nobody important cared about. The kind of cargo that nobody noticed until it stopped moving. By day 5, 14 species filed trade disruption complaints. By day 9, the outer ring colonies were rationing. The Valori ambassador gave a press statement calling the blackout an emotional response typical of younger species, and compared humans to a child holding its breath until it gets what it wants. The quote was broadcast across 300 systems. It got a reliable laugh from the inner ring delegations. The outer ring colonies did not laugh. They were running out of grain. Inside the blackout, the machine was waking up. Admiral Sable Richter stood in the operations center of Jericho Station, a hollowed asteroid parked in the dark between Mars and Jupiter, invisible to anyone who didn't already know it was there. The station had been built 60 years ago by people who understood that peace was a weather pattern, not a permanent condition. It had been maintained, supplied, updated, staffed by a skeleton crew of engineers who ran drills every month for a war that most humans thought would never come. The drills were over. The war was here. Richter read inventory reports. She read them the way a doctor reads blood work, looking for the numbers that mattered, ignoring the ones that didn't. Mothballed dreadnoughts being pulled from storage and refitted in orbital docks. Automated weapons foundries spinning up on Titan, on Ceres, on a dozen moons that the galaxy thought were mining operations. Recruitment numbers from every colony in human space. The recruitment numbers were the part that would have confused the Council. Meridian 4 was one colony. The strike killed 16,000 people. In a rational species, and the Council had only ever dealt with rational species, the response would come from Meridian's sister colonies, from the immediate region, from people with a personal connection to the dead. That was the model. Grief was local. Revenge was local. War was expensive, and sane beings calculated the cost before they committed. Humans from colonies that had never heard of Meridian 4 were volunteering. Miners from the Belt, teachers from Proxima, engineers from Ganymede who had never met a single person on Meridian 4 and had no economic or political reason to care about what happened there. They cared anyway. A junior officer on Richter's staff, a young woman from Luna who had joined the Navy because it paid for her education, looked at the recruitment data and asked the question that every non-human species would have asked. Why are the unaffected colonies sending people? Richter did not look up from her datapad. You've never read a human history book? I have. Read it again, slower. Thuric Volsci was assigned to the Human Compliance Projection Committee on day 4 of the blackout. The committee's job was simple: predict when humans would capitulate. They had a model. The model was excellent. It had been built over 11,000 years and 46 successful sanitization operations, and it had never been wrong. The model accounted for species psychology, economic dependence, military capacity, population resilience, and something the Valori called pain threshold integration, which was a mathematical way of asking, how much does it hurt before they stop? The model predicted human capitulation within 40 days. Thuric reviewed the model. The model was clean. The data was clean. The math was clean. Everything was clean the way his office was clean, and the kill order had been clean, and the word sanitation was clean. He did not trust clean things the way he used to. He requested the full human file from the intelligence archive. It arrived in a data packet thinner than he expected. Humans had been in the galactic community for less than 200 years. They were new. Their file was short. Most of it was trade data and territorial mapping and a cultural overview that described them as gregarious, adaptable, economically aggressive, militarily underdeveloped. There was a subsection on human history. It was 9 pages long. The intelligence analyst who compiled it had flagged it as largely irrelevant, pre-contact internal conflicts, primitive weapons, no strategic implications for current projections. Thurek read it anyway. He read about a city called Stalingrad. He read about a winter that killed more soldiers than the enemy did. He read about a species that burned its own crops, and its own cities, and its own land, rather than let an invader use them. He read about people who ate leather and wallpaper paste, and still did not stop fighting. He read about a siege that lasted 5 months and cost over 1 million lives, and ended not because one side surrendered, but because one side simply ran out of living soldiers to send. He read it twice. He did not sleep that night. In the morning, he filed a formal request for a meeting with the High Arbiter to discuss potential model inadequacies in the human compliance projection. The request was denied. The reason given was, the model's accuracy across 46 prior operations does not warrant review. Thurek stared at the denial for a long time. Then he opened the model again and looked at the 46 prior species. He pulled up their files, one by one. The Rethari, the Uleng, the Vis Collective. 46 names. 46 species that had been struck, had grieved, had calculated, had surrendered. Every single one of them had been spacefaring for less than 1,000 years when they were sanitized. Humans had been killing each other for 300,000 years before they ever left their planet. They had practice. Kale Vasek set foot on Earth for the first time in 11 years. The planet smelled wrong. Too wet, too heavy, too much sky with nothing between you and the stars. He had grown up on a station, moved to colony ships, settled on Meridian 4 because his wife wanted dirt under her feet, and their daughter wanted trees. Kale had learned to tolerate planets. He never learned to love them. The recruitment center was in a building that used to be a school. The officer behind the desk was tired. The kind of tired that comes not from lack of sleep, but from the weight of knowing that the sleep you get will not fix the thing that woke you up. Kale put his freight license on the desk. I can't shoot. I don't know tactics. I've never been in a fight that didn't involve a docking clamp and bad language. He tapped the license. But I can move anything, anywhere, through anything. 20 years, no lost cargo, no missed delivery. The officer looked at his file. Age, injury history, civilian status, colony of residence, Meridian 4. The officer did not ask if he had family there. The officer had learned not to ask that question. Kale was assigned to Logistics Fleet 7. His new cargo manifest looked nothing like Seedling's. He did not read it closely. He did not need to. He knew what war supplies looked like. You learned to recognize the weight. On day 19, Thurek Volshai did something that had no precedent in Velori legal history. He amended his vote. The kill order had already been executed. The strike had already happened. 16,000 people were already dead. An amendment changed nothing. It was the legal equivalent of crossing out your signature on a contract that had already been fulfilled. It was meaningless. He filed it anyway. The amendment entered the public record. It appeared as a single line in the daily proceedings. Arbiter Volshai, retroactive amendment, Resolution 1142S, vote changed from affirm to abstain, reason cited, procedural concerns. Nobody read the daily proceedings, but the record existed. The line was there. His name was attached to it. He was summoned for psychological evaluation within the hour. Day 19 ended. Earth's calm blackout lifted, not gradually, not with diplomatic overtures, or trade negotiations, or the careful language of a species ready to discuss terms. The blackout ended with a single data packet, broadcast simultaneously to every council delegation on every frequency in every language format the galaxy used. One file. The file contained 16,042 entries. Each entry was a name, Next to each name was an age. Next to each age was an occupation. Mirella Vasic, age 11, student. Oren Dan, age 44, structural engineer. Davi Costariz, age 7, no occupation listed. 16,042 names. The youngest was 4 months old. The oldest was 91. There were teachers and pilots and cooks and doctors and children who had not yet decided what they wanted to be, and now never would. The file was not a memorial. The file was titled Invoice. The Vailori ambassador read the title and did not finish his nectar. His aide noticed. The aide had never seen the ambassador leave a glass unfinished. Across the chamber, Thurik Volshai opened the file on his personal screen. He scrolled through the names. He did not know any of them. He would never know any of them. But he read each one, because reading them was the smallest thing he could do, and the smallest things were all he had left. He saved the file to his folder, the one labeled Miscalculations. Humanity declared war on a Tuesday. Not on the Vailori, not on the Council, not on any species, any government, any fleet. The formal declaration, transmitted on open channels and filed simultaneously with every diplomatic office in the Concord, declared war on Resolution 1142-S, the legal framework that had authorized the strike on Meridian 4. The document cited the resolution by its full title, its filing number, its date of ratification, and the names of every delegate who voted in favor. The declaration stated that the objective of military operations was the permanent dissolution of the Concord's authority to authorize sanitization actions against any species, for any reason, under any circumstances, effective immediately and in perpetuity. Not territory, not reparations, not revenge. Humans were going to war over a piece of paper. The Council's strategic analysts spent 3 days trying to find the real objective hidden beneath the stated one. Wars were fought for resources, for land, for dominance. Every species they had ever fought wanted something you could weigh or measure or draw on a map. The analysts ran models, cross-referenced human economic data, mapped potential territorial ambitions. They found nothing. The stated objective was the real objective. Humans wanted to break a law. This was the moment the models began to fail. The first operation was not an attack. 30 human stealth corvettes jumped into the Vailori home system at 0600 local time. They appeared on defense screens like a scatter of thrown stones, small, fast, running no weapons hot. The Vailori home fleet scrambled. Kill orders were requested, authorized, transmitted. The corvettes did not fire. They broadcast. Every civilian communication channel in the Vailori system, public broadcasts, personal comm networks, entertainment feeds, emergency bands, was flooded with a single audio file. The file was the raw emergency recording from Meridian 4. Unedited, unfiltered. The screams, the static, the sound of buildings falling and people calling names that no one answered, and underneath it all, threaded through the chaos like a wire through meat, the Harvest Festival music. 90 seconds. The corvettes held position for 90 seconds, long enough for the broadcast to reach every receiver in the system, and then they jumped out. Not a single weapon was fired, not a single ship was scratched. The Vailori home fleet was left pointing its guns at empty space, while 11 billion Vailori civilians listened to what their government had done. The government had never told them. The sanitization was public record, but public record and public knowledge were different animals. Nobody read the daily proceedings. Nobody asked what happened to a minor human colony on the outer ring. It was routine. It was plumbing. Now it was screaming on every speaker in the system. Kale Vasic flew the 4th Corvette in the formation. He was not military. His hands knew freight controls, not combat systems. But the Corvette's job was not combat. Its job was to fly in, hold still, and fly out. And holding still in hostile space, while alarms screamed and targeting locks painted your hull, was really just a specialized form of patience. And patience was the only thing a freight captain had more of than engine grease. He held position. The broadcast played. He could hear it through the Corvette's internal speakers. The emergency bands, the voices, the music. He had heard it before. He had been hearing it for weeks, in his sleep, in the quiet moments between jumps, in the space between one breath and the next. 90 seconds. He counted them by naming his daughter's favorite things. Trees, 1. Strawberries, 2. That song she used to sing in the morning, the one about the river. The one she made up half the words to because she could never remember the real ones. 3. The way she said dad when she wanted something. Not daddy. She had stopped saying daddy at 9, and the loss of those 2 extra letters had hurt him more than he ever told anyone. 4. Moon rocks. 5. She used to dig in the dirt on the eastern ridge and bring home rocks and call them moon rocks, and line them up on the kitchen windowsill. They were not moon rocks. Cale never told her that. The jump drive engaged. The stars stretched. The Valori system disappeared behind him. Cale unclenched his hands from the controls and looked at the red marks his fingers had pressed into his palms. The broadcast run cracked something. Not in the Valori military, in the Valori public. 11 billion civilians had heard the screams, and 11 billion civilians began asking questions that their government had not prepared answers for. Protests were not common in Valori culture. They were a hierarchical species, obedient by nature, structured by instinct. But the sound of children dying is a universal language. It does not require translation. It does not respect hierarchy. Within a week, 11 species formally withdrew their support for the sanitization. The Valori bloc, which had controlled the Council's military policy for 6,000 years, scrambled to hold its coalition together. Emergency sessions, closed-door negotiations, promises and threats in equal measure. Thurek Volshai watched from the margins. His security clearance had been reduced. His office had been moved to a smaller room on a lower floor. His title had been changed from Arbiter to Analyst Xeno-Behavioral Deviation Subcommittee, which was the Valori government's way of saying, we cannot fire you because you filed a legal amendment, but we can make you irrelevant. They made him irrelevant in the wrong room. His new office had access to the internal communication archive. A clerical error. Someone had copied his old clearance permissions to his new terminal without checking which files those permissions covered. Thurek discovered this on his second day in the new office. He sat very still, for a long time, looking at the blinking access indicator on his screen. He opened the kill order's internal communications. He found the Valori ambassador's post-strike messages. The press release drafted before the fires were out. A joke about humans squealing that the ambassador had sent to 3 other delegates with a laughing glyph attached. He found the vote buying. 9 delegations paid. Not in credits, nothing so crude. In trade access, in military contracts, in the quiet rearrangement of tariff structures that made certain species richer for saying yes. Thurek copied everything. He did not send it. Not yet. He saved it to a file, and looked at the file and thought about what it meant and what it would cost him. The file was too large for his miscalculations folder. He created a new one. He labeled it Evidence. The Battle of Solace Gate was the first real engagement. A Valori strike group, 12 warships, heavy cruiser class, veterans of 3 prior sanitization enforcement actions, moved to cut a human supply corridor that ran through a region of space called Solace Gate. The corridor fed ammunition and medical supplies to the forward human fleet. Cutting it would cripple the human war effort within weeks. Admiral Richter was waiting. The battle lasted 11 minutes. Not because it was close, because Richter made it last 11 minutes. She could have ended it in 4. She had the firepower, the positioning, the intelligence on every Valori ship's shield frequency and reactor cycle. She had stolen their schematics from an archive world, using operatives who had spent 3 months pretending to clean floors. She did not destroy the Valori fleet. She disabled it. Every ship, engines dead, Weapons dead, communications dead, life support intact. 12 warships, crewed by thousands of Valori soldiers, floating dark and silent in the void, with nothing broken that would kill them, and everything broken that would let them fight. Then Richter broadcast, on an open channel, in Valori Standard, "Collect your wounded. You have 6 hours." The Valori sent rescue ships. The humans did not fire on the rescue ships. The disabled fleet was towed home. Every surviving officer filed the same report, using language so similar it might have been coordinated. The humans had the ability to destroy us completely. They chose not to. This was not mercy. This was a message. The Valori High Command convened an emergency session. The senior war strategist, a female Valori named Sethka, who had commanded the Axiom Fleet's reserve wing for 40 years, presented a revised threat assessment. She displayed a human military concept that had taken her team 2 weeks to fully translate, because the concept did not exist in any other species' strategic doctrine. Proportional response. The room was quiet. Sethka explained. At Solace Gate, the humans had the power to kill everyone. They measured their violence instead. They calculated exactly how much force was needed to send a message, and used that amount and not 1 joule more. This meant every future engagement was a choice. The humans were not fighting at their limit. They were fighting at a level they had selected, and they could change that selection at any time. They are not trying to survive us, Sethka said. They are trying to teach us something, and if we do not learn it, they will stop teaching. The room understood. After the broadcast run, after the jump, after the debrief, Kale sat in the Corvette's cockpit and did not move. The co-pilot, an ensign, 20 years old, from a station near Jupiter whose name Kale had not learned yet, asked if he was okay. Kale was looking at the navigation display. There was a scratch on the screen, a small one, crescent-shaped, probably from a tool or a fingernail during maintenance. It was meaningless. The kind of thing you see 1,000 times and never notice. It was shaped like the moons his daughter used to draw. She drew them on everything, on paper, on walls, on the back of his hand when he fell asleep on the couch. Little crescent moons, always the same shape, always tilted the same way, like the moon was leaning to look at something interesting, just out of frame. "My kid used to draw moons on everything," Kale said. The ensign said nothing. Kale said nothing else. The Corvette jumped to the next waypoint, and the scratch on the screen caught the light from the new stars, and for 1/2 second, it looked like the moon was leaning again, looking at something only it could see. The Axiom fleet had not moved in 6,000 years. It sat in a shipyard carved into the core of a dead moon in the Valori home system. 200 warships, each one older than human civilization, each one carrying enough firepower to crack a planet's crust like an egg. The fleet had been built during the Council's founding wars, when the galaxy was young and violent, and species still had to be taught the shape of obedience. The Axiom fleet was the teacher. It had ended wars. It had ended species. It had ended the very concept of resistance for so long that most civilizations in the Concord had forgotten what resistance looked like. The Council voted to wake it up. The vote was not unanimous. 43 species voted against activation. They cited the human broadcast runs, the Battle of Solace Gate, the growing evidence that this war was not following any pattern the Council had seen before. They argued for negotiation. They argued for compromise. They argued that deploying a doomsday fleet against a species that had already demonstrated restraint was the act of a government that had run out of ideas, and was reaching for a hammer because hammers were all it had left. The vote passed by 9. Thuric Volshai watched from the public gallery. He was not allowed in the chamber anymore. He sat in a visitor's seat designed for tourists and school groups, surrounded by empty chairs, and counted the votes on his personal screen. 9-vote margin. He pulled up the delegate profiles for those 9 votes. He cross-referenced them with the files in his evidence folder. The trade agreements, the military contracts, the tariff adjustments that turned yes votes into profitable investments. All 9, every single one, bought. The most powerful weapon in galactic history was being unleashed because 9 people had been paid to raise their claws. He sat in the tourist seat and looked at the grand rotunda, the carved stone, the tiered seating, the 11,000-year-old architecture, designed to look permanent and inevitable and correct. He had loved this room once. He had believed in what it represented, the way some species believe in gods. He did not believe in it anymore. But he still had his evidence folder, and the folder was very, very full. The words spread through human space in hours. The Axiom Fleet, 200 warships, coming for Sol. Admiral Richter received the intelligence report in her quarters on Jericho Station. She read it once, set it down, and poured herself a glass of water. She drank the water. She read the report again. Then she opened the file her operatives had stolen from the Valori archive world. The full technical schematics of the Axiom Fleet, acquired by 3 intelligence agents who had spent 3 months cleaning floors and emptying waste receptacles in a military archive building while copying data onto devices hidden in their cleaning equipment. The schematics were 6,000 years old. The ships were 6,000 years old. And in 6,000 years, no one had ever updated the reactor shielding harmonics. Why would they? Nothing had ever survived long enough to need better shielding. The Axiom Fleet was a god. Gods do not need maintenance. Richter circled a section of the reactor schematic with her fingernail, leaving a faint mark on the screen. 6,000 years, she said to her flag captain, a man named Torres, who had served with her for a decade, and had learned to read her silences. They never changed the reactor harmonics. Not once. Torres looked at the circled section. Resonance charges? Small ones. Corvette delivered. You'd have to fly close. Dangerously close. How close? Richter told him. Torres was quiet for a moment. We'll need pilots who can thread tight spaces at combat speed. I know a fleet full of freight captains, Richter said. The humans called it the tithe. There was no order, no law, no conscription mandate. The Unified Naval Command broadcast the situation. The Axiom Fleet was coming. Sol was the target. The combined human military was outnumbered and outgunned, and then waited. The response came from everywhere. A librarian on Proxima Centauri donated her personal shuttle. It was 30 years old, barely FTL capable, held together by maintenance patches and stubbornness. She flew it to the nearest staging point herself. A mining crew on Titan welded armor plating onto their ore hauler, filled the cargo bay with emergency medical supplies they had purchased with their own wages, and reported for duty as a field hospital ship. The crew foreman was 62 years old and had a bad knee and had never been in a military operation in his life. He told the recruitment officer that his knee was fine. Kale Vasik's Logistics Fleet 7 doubled in size in 72 hours. Ships arrived from everywhere. Civilian freighters, passenger transports, private yachts with their luxury interiors gutted and replaced with cargo racks. The people flying them were not soldiers. They were truck drivers and delivery pilots and retired captains who had come out of retirement because they could not sit still while the fleet was short on hands. A freighter arrived from the Callisto settlements. Ancient ship, pre-war design. Its captain was a 68-year-old woman named Marin Solis, who had retired from freight work before Kale was born. She walked onto Kale's command deck, looked around, and asked where she was needed. Kale assigned her to medical supply runs on the safest corridor he could find. Marin looked at him the way a grandmother looks at a grandson who has just said something very stupid. I didn't come out here to be safe, son. Kale reassigned her to the front corridor. She nodded once, turned around, and walked back to her ship. She did not thank him. She did not need to. They understood each other the way people understand each other when they are both carrying the same weight, and neither of them is willing to put it down. The night before the Axiom fleet was due to arrive, Kale was in the cargo bay doing inventory. Manifest after manifest. Ammunition crates. Medical kits, with standardized contents and standardized labels. Ration packs in flavors that nobody liked but everyone ate. Replacement parts for engine components that would burn out under combat stress. Body bags, folded flat, stacked in containers with neutral markings that did not say what was inside, because everyone already knew. In the back corner of the bay, behind the ammunition and the ration packs, he found a crate that was not on any manifest. It was small, unmarked, sealed with civilian tape, not military strapping. He opened it. Soil. Sealed containers of soil. Dark, rich, heavy with organic matter. He picked one up and turned it in his hands. The container was labeled in handwriting, not printed, handwritten, in ink, by a person who had taken the time to write neatly. Meridian IV, Eastern Ridge, Sector 7. Someone had packed dirt from the colony. He did not know who, he did not know when. He did not know if they had gathered it before the strike or after, if they had walked through the ruins to fill these containers, if they had knelt in the ash and scooped what was left of the soil that had grown the crops that had fed the people who were now names on an invoice. He opened one container. The soil smelled like the Eastern Ridge after rain, like wet minerals and the local root vegetable that grew in everything, and the faint sweetness of the wheat fields that ran along the ridge's south slope. His daughter had played in those fields. She dug holes and filled them in, and dug them again, and called the rocks she found moon rocks, and brought them home with dirt under her fingernails, and a grin that took up her entire face. He closed the container. He sealed the crate, and added it to the manifest by hand, writing the entry in the same careful handwriting that was on the labels. Because whoever had packed this cargo had cared enough to write neatly, and Kale would match that care. He wrote, Soil, Meridian 4, Quantity, 12 containers, Status, accounted for, Destination, pending. He finished the rest of the inventory. He checked every crate, every seal, every label. His hands were steady. They were always steady. That was not the part of him that was breaking. The Axiom fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Sol system at 0347 hours. 200 warships, each one the size of a small city. Their hulls were black and ancient, and covered in the script of a language that predated the Concorde itself. Prayers, or warnings, or names of the species that had died beneath their guns. Nobody alive could read it anymore. The script was decorative now, history, as wallpaper. They glowed, not with running lights or engine flares, but with the deep, slow pulse of reactors that had been burning for 6,000 years without stopping. The light was old. It looked old. It moved through space the way old things move, with the weight of everything they had outlasted. The combined human fleet was waiting. It was smaller, much smaller. Warships and converted freighters and civilian vessels with armor welded over their cargo bays. Dreadnoughts pulled from mothballs alongside yachts pulled from retirement. A fleet built from everything a species could scrape together when it decided collectively and without debate that losing was not one of the available options. Admiral Richter stood on the bridge of the UNSF Prometheus. She looked at the Axiom fleet on her tactical display. 200 points of light, 6,000 years of unchallengeable power. She opened a comm channel. Not to the Axiom fleet, to the Council, to the galaxy. Open broadcast, every frequency, every language. You built those ships to fight species that know when to stop. She paused. The pause was not dramatic. It was precise. It lasted exactly long enough for the sentence to land, and not 1 second longer. We don't. The channel closed. Torres looked at her. Orders, Admiral? Richter looked at the 200 ancient lights on her display. She looked at her own fleet, smaller, younger, cobbled together from a species that had been in space for less than 2 centuries. Launch the wolf packs. The wolf packs launched at 0351. Small ships. Corvettes, most of them. Fast and light, and carrying a single weapon each. A resonance charge tuned to a frequency that had been obsolete for 5,000 years. A frequency that no living species used in their reactor shielding, because no living species was still running reactors designed 6 millennia ago. The Axiom fleet was. The corvettes flew in packs of 4. They did not fly in formation. They flew the way freight pilots fly through asteroid fields, reading the debris, feeling the gaps, threading spaces that military pilots would calculate, and freight pilots just knew. Admiral Richter had called in Logistics Fleet 7 for this. The Navy had combat corvette pilots, trained and certified, who could fly attack runs by the book. She wanted pilots who had spent their lives moving through spaces that weren't meant to be moved through, carrying loads that weren't meant to be carried, on schedules that weren't meant to be possible. She wanted truck drivers. Kale Vasic flew lead in Wolfpack 9. His corvette was a retrofitted courier ship. The weapons console had been installed 3 days ago and still smelled like sealant. The resonance charge sat in the belly of the ship like a stone in a sling. One shot, one chance. Fly close enough to an Axiom capital ship to deploy the charge against its reactor housing. Then pull out through whatever hell the deployment created. Close enough meant close enough to see the ancient script on the hull. The first wave hit at 0355. 12 wolf packs, 48 corvettes. They came in fast and low, skimming the Axiom fleet's outer formation, slipping between the massive ships like sparrows between cathedral pillars. The Axiom fleet's point defense systems were 6,000 years old. They were designed to track warships, big, slow, predictable targets that fought the way the galaxy had always fought. They were not designed to track things this small, this fast, this insane. The resonance charges detonated against reactor housings. The effect was not an explosion. It was a vibration, a hum that passed through 6,000-year-old shielding like a whisper through paper, found the reactor's operating frequency, and matched it perfectly. A reactor that has been running for 6,000 years holds a tremendous amount of energy. When that energy begins to resonate at a frequency the shielding was never built to contain, the reactor does not explode. It unravels. The containment field destabilizes in cascading waves, each wave releasing more energy than the last, and the reactor eats itself from the inside, over the course of approximately 90 seconds. Again. The Axiom capital ships began to die. Not fast. Richter had designed it that way. Fast deaths were invisible. She wanted the galaxy to watch. She wanted every council delegate, every Valori citizen, every species that had ever whispered the Axiom fleet's name like a prayer, to see what happened when gods were built on foundations that nobody bothered to inspect. The first ship went dark at 0357. Its running lights flickered, stuttered, and died. The ancient script on its hull, the prayers or warnings or names of the dead, was swallowed by darkness. A ship that had burned for 6,000 years without stopping, stopped. By 0400, 11 Axiom ships were dark. By 0410, 31. The Council watched in real time. The feed was broadcast across the galaxy, not by humans, but by 3 neutral press agencies that had positioned observation drones at the edge of the Sol system. The galaxy watched, the most powerful weapon it had ever built, come apart like wet paper. Kale flew his run at 0408. Wolfpack 9. 4 corvettes. Their target was an Axiom dreadnought in the fleet's central formation, a ship so large it had its own gravity signature. So old its hull had developed a patina that turned the black metal the color of bruised skin. Kale flew point. The approach corridor was a gap between 2 dying ships, their reactors already unraveling, their hulls venting radiation in sheets that turned the void white and orange. Flying through it was like threading a needle inside a furnace. The corvette's heat warnings screamed. Kale's hands were on the controls. And his hands were steady, because they were always steady. because 20 years of freight work in asteroid belts had taught his hands that shaking was a luxury they could not afford. He deployed the resonance charge at a distance of 40 meters from the Dreadnought's reactor housing. 40 meters. Close enough to see the bolts on the hull plates. Close enough to see his own ship reflected in the ancient metal. The charge attached. The hum began. Cale pulled up and out, banking hard through a corridor of burning debris that had been a warship 3 minutes ago. His cockpit filled with light. White, orange, the deep red of a reactor losing its war with physics. He cleared the debris field. Behind him, the Dreadnought's lights began to flicker. He looked at his hands. Steady. He looked at the inside of his flight glove, where he had written his daughter's name in marker that morning. Small letters. The ink was already starting to fade from the sweat. Thurick Volshai transmitted his dossier at 0412. He had been sitting in his small office on the lower floor, watching the battle feed on his personal screen, watching the Axiom fleet, the Council's God, the galaxy's guarantee of order, come apart ship by ship. He had been watching for 20 minutes. In those 20 minutes, something finished breaking inside him. Not loudly, not with drama, the way a bone breaks when it has been cracked for a long time and finally someone puts weight on it. He opened the evidence folder. He attached every file, the kill order's internal communications, the ambassador's celebration messages, the 9 bought votes, the trade agreements, the corruption mapped in careful detail by a bureaucrat who had spent his career making ugly things look clean, and now, for the first time, was making clean things look ugly. Simultaneously. The Council's political structure did not survive the next 48 hours. Not because of the battle. Because of the files. Because corruption that everyone suspected but nobody could prove was now proven, documented, sourced, and sitting in every delegate's inbox with the name of a former arbiter attached to it. Thurick was arrested. He did not resist. He did not run. He stood in his small office and waited for security to arrive. And when they arrived, he walked with them calmly, the way a man walks when he has already decided that whatever comes next is the cost of the only honest thing he has ever done. At his hearing, he was asked why he had betrayed the Concord. Thurick looked at the tribunal. 3 senior Valori judges. Old, certain, scales polished to a shine. They looked like the Grand Rotunda. Permanent, inevitable, correct. I did not betray it, Thurick said. I read the human file. Ours was worse. The Axiom Fleet's commander ordered a retreat at 0431. By that time, 63 of the 200 ships were dead or dying. The remaining ships, still formidable, still ancient, still carrying enough firepower to end worlds, turned and ran. The word retreat had never appeared in the Axiom Fleet's operational history. There was no protocol for it. The fleet had never needed one. Admiral Richter watched the retreat on her tactical display. 137 ships pulling back toward Valori space. Her fleet had the momentum. Her fleet had the position. Her fleet had the technology and the intelligence and the will to pursue. And the Axiom Fleet was wounded and disorganized and running. Torres stood beside her. He did not speak. He waited. Richter watched the retreating lights for a long time. Let them go. The message had been delivered. The ceasefire terms were 3 sentences long. The sanitization framework is dissolved. Permanently. Meridian 4 is declared sovereign human territory in perpetuity. No council authority applies. The names on the invoice are to be read aloud, in full, in the Grand Rotunda, by the delegations that voted for the strike. 46 species had been sanitized in the Council's history. None of them had ever gotten terms like these, because none of them had ever broken the thing that hurt them instead of just learning to live with the wound. The reading of the names took 4 hours. Council delegates stood at the podium, one by one, and spoke the names of 16,042 human beings they had voted to kill. The translation systems handled most of the pronunciation. Human names were strange in alien mouths. Too many vowels, too many soft sounds, too many syllables that required tongues and teeth shaped differently than the ones trying to speak them. Kale watched the broadcast from his Corvette, parked in the debris field of the battle. Around him, the wreckage of gods cooled in the vacuum, twisted metal and dead reactors, and ancient script that no one could read, floating in the dark like letters from a language the universe had finally forgotten. The names were read alphabetically. It took time to reach the V's. Kale waited. He had always been good at waiting. 20 years of freight runs. You learned patience or you learned nothing. The Valori delegate at the podium was young, junior, probably assigned to the reading because no senior delegate wanted to do it. The young Valori's voice was flat and careful and scared. The name came. Mirella Vasic, age 11. Student. The delegate clipped the vowels wrong. Vasic came out with a hard first syllable. The I flattened, the name bent into a shape that did not fit it. Kale mouthed the correct pronunciation. Quiet. Just his lips moving in the dark cockpit, forming the syllables of his daughter's name the way he had formed them 1,000 times. Calling her for dinner, saying good night, yelling at her to put on shoes before she went outside. He did not transmit the correction. He mouthed it into the dark, where the debris of 6,000-year-old warships drifted past his canopy, and the name hung in the air of the cockpit for a moment before the recyclers took it. 6 months later, Meridian 4, the Eastern Ridge, Sector 7. The colony was being rebuilt. New structures, new foundations, new everything. The old colony was gone. Not just destroyed, but cleared. The rubble removed, the ground leveled, the scars graded smooth by construction equipment that worked in shifts around the clock. The new buildings looked nothing like the old ones. Different materials, different designs, built by people who had not been here before and did not know what the old buildings had looked like, and so built what they knew, which was different, which was fine, which was the way things worked when you started over. Kale stood on the ridge. He was holding the crate from the cargo bay, the one with 12 containers of soil. He had carried it from the landing pad himself. It was not heavy. Soil is not heavy. But it weighed something that had nothing to do with mass. He opened the first container and poured the soil onto the ground. It landed on the new graded earth like a dark stain, richer and older than the dirt around it. It smelled the same. After everything, the fire, the vacuum, the sealed container, the months in a cargo bay, it smelled the same. Wet minerals, root vegetable sweetness, the wheat fields on the south slope. He opened the second container, poured it, the third, the fourth. He emptied all 12, one by one, pouring the old soil onto the new ground, mixing what was left of what had been with what was trying to become. It was a small thing. 12 containers, a few square meters of earth, slightly darker than the rest. He knelt and pushed his hands into the dirt. He stayed like that for a long time, kneeling on the ridge, hands in the ground, eyes open, looking at nothing, looking at everything, looking at the place where his daughter had dug for moon rocks in soil that was now partly beneath his fingers, mixed with the new dirt, indistinguishable from it, gone and present at the same time. Behind him, a cargo shuttle descended, with building materials. The pilot hailed him on the comm. He did not answer. The pilot landed anyway and began unloading without him, because there was work to do, and the work did not wait. And the pilot understood that some people needed to kneel in the dirt for a while before they could stand up and keep going. The Harvest Festival was not mentioned. Not by Kale, not by anyone on the ridge, not by the construction crews, or the shuttle pilots, or the new colonists who were arriving every week to build a life in a place that had been ashes 6 months ago. But someone, no one could say who, no one had seen it happen, no one took credit, had planted a speaker on a metal post near the landing pad.